Thanks for staying with Bernama TV. I'm Jason Wee.
And I'm NADIAH LATIF.
Welcome to Siaran Khas Undi Negeri Sembilan, our special coverage of the 16th Negeri Sembilan state election. Now, Nadia, it is a crucial day for Negeri Sembilan as voters head out to the polls to fulfill their democratic right and civic duty to elect representatives to the state legislative assembly. Now, a total of 859,760 registered voters, including 7,391 postal voters, will determine which coalition is given the mandate to govern Negeri Sembilan, following a 14-day period of campaigning that ended at midnight last night. Now, the Election Commission targets a voter turnout rate of between 72 and 75% today, with results expected to be known as early as 10 p.m., while the full results are expected to be obtained before midnight.
Definitely. Now, Jason, before we begin, let's just take a quick look at the key dates leading up to today's poll. Negeri Sembilan State Assembly was dissolved on the 5th of June. Nomination day took place on the 18th of June, followed by early voting on the 28th of July. We know that there were 22,339 early votes. This included armed forces personnel, spouses, and of course 5,455 from the Royal Malaysian Police and personnel spouses. Now today, the 1st of August, on polling day, with voters across the state casting their ballots to decide the composition of the next state legislative assembly. So voting is scheduled to continue until 6 p.m. this evening at polling centres, and this includes schools, community halls, public halls and colleges.
Now, as with most elections in Malaysia, it is exciting. We have a total of 103 candidates vying for seats in the Negeri Sembilan State Legislative Assembly this year. That's an increase from 83 candidates in the 2023 state elections, reflecting a more competitive contest this time around, with voters choosing representatives across all 36 state constituencies. Now, looking at the breakdown by party, Pakatan Harapan is fielding the highest number of candidates with 36, followed by Barisan Nasional with 25.
And throughout the special coverage, which of course will bring with you the latest updates from the polling centres across Negeri Sembilan and live reports from our colleagues that are waiting on ground, our journalists on ground as well as analysts in our studio, as we track not only voter turnout but key developments of what they could mean for the state's political landscape. Now in studio today, we have IBRAHIM SUFFIAN, Program Director of Merdeka Centre, and we will also be joined via phone with AIRA AZHARI, the CEO of IDS.
Now, for those of you watching, follow us on the latest developments and results throughout the day via Bernama's dedicated Negeri Sembilan election portal at prn.bernama.com/n9. That's on your screens.
Now, before we begin, let's talk about little news updates. Weather. Malaysians always talk about the weather, right? Today, on the polling stations across Negeri Sembilan, we're seeing voters turn out. Of course, they have been advised to stay alert. It does look a little gloomy. In some places are facing a little rain. Thunderstorms are expected in several areas by this afternoon. In Klang Valley, it's also started raining, so please drive safe wherever you are heading. Now, the Malaysian Meteorological Department, or Met Malaysia, has forecasted that the weather across all areas of Negeri Sembilan, now this includes the districts of Seremban, Jempol, Jelebu, Kuala Pilah, Tampin, Port Dickson and Rembau, will be clear throughout the morning until noon, while in the afternoon most of these areas and almost all of the districts in Negeri Sembilan are expected to receive either heavy rain or some rain and thunderstorms. So of course, voters are encouraged to plan your journey early. I know the highways are already chock-a-block, so please stay safe. Head to the polling stations well and come back safely before the weather worsens.
Now, another news update. As of 1 p.m., we have the Election Commission saying that voter turnout in the Negeri Sembilan state election is currently standing at 44.67% as of 1 p.m. Now, polling will continue until 6 p.m. today, with voters who have yet to cast their ballots encouraged to come forward early to avoid possible delays, especially with rain expected in several areas. The Election Commission has reminded voters to bring their identity cards for verification and will caution against handing them to anyone other than election officials. Now, mobile phones are prohibited at polling channels, with devices required to be placed at designated areas before voting and collected afterwards. The new procedure aims to streamline voting while protecting ballot secrecy.
Now, in the studio today, we have IBRAHIM SUFFIAN joining us, Program Director of Merdeka Centre. Thank you so much. I know it's been a really heavy week with so many different things happening, but let's talk about the new political realignment that we're seeing, right? This particular election comes at a time when Malaysia's political alignments continue to evolve, shall we say. So from your perspective, what does this election tell us about what's changing in the coalition and the political landscape of Malaysia?
I think a number of things. I think we are at the precipice of a historical situation in our political history as a country, because for the longest time, Malaysians have always been used to have at least two sides.
Yes.
One governing coalition, another in the opposition for the longest time. And I would say since 1974, we have always had PAS being the alternative to UMNO and Barisan Nasional. But I think in this particular election, we have something new, where I think we have transited from what used to be very ideologically driven contest to something that's more pragmatic and more geared to win, where I think is driven by arithmetics as opposed to ideologies and also philosophies. We have that, I think, going on, because now we see in the 36 state constituencies in Negeri Sembilan, 25 contested by BN and 11 contested by Perikatan Nasional, which is led by PAS.
So, Ben, as we get into the party configuration, in the 2023 Negeri Sembilan state election, we had PH and BN contesting separately before coming together to form the state government. This time around, we're seeing quite a different dynamic, right? With BN and PN appearing to cooperate in several different constituencies, although without a formal agreement. Talk us through what are the incentive structures running through these political party behavior, and how are they adapting to this quite changing landscape in Malaysian politics?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now is a fragmentation of the old order of doing politics in this country, where I think leaders of the Barisan Nasional as well as PAS, specifically Perikatan Nasional, I think have gotten round to the idea that if they collaborated, if they coordinated in fielding candidates, they can maximize the number of votes that they can get in our first past the post system. And in the context of Negeri Sembilan, where you have, I think, nearly 60% of the voters are Malay, and then the rest are made up of the other communities, when you have a candidate from just one party, ostensibly championing on Malay interests and Malay rights, there is a greater likelihood that they can pull the votes from PAS supporters, from UMNO supporters, to back up that one candidate. And I think what we'll see tonight when the results come in would be a validation of whether or not this pooling of votes, this combination of support is going to carry these two parties through and win the state assembly. And ostensibly, we also see a post-election coalition in the making.
You've mentioned several things. You mentioned that now it's very much data-driven and sort of like arithmetic strategy, and this is most probably going to lead us to see a progression of some kind of fragmentation in how Negeri Sembilan's decisions are going to be made. So earlier, when you said that there's going to be a fight between Pakatan Harapan, Barisan Nasional, and previously with PAS, if you look at it right now, Pakatan Harapan is still the only coalition that's contesting in all 36 seats. And we've got UMNO, MCA, MIC for Barisan Nasional, which was part of the governing partner in 2023. And interestingly, you're also seeing Bersatu, despite the fact of the results in Johor, have got 24 seats contesting, and it's contesting separately from the BN, PN, PAS pact under its own logo, under its own manifesto, despite maintaining certain remains part from the PN nationally. Now, Bersatu, if we were to look at that, as a component party of Perikatan Nasional, has chosen to contest under its own logo. How significant is that decision in terms of party identity, in terms of coalition strategy?
Well, I think in terms of party identity, let's just talk about the realities of politics right now. Bersatu is on the way out from Perikatan Nasional because they have lost the key positions there. And I think in all likelihood, we are probably going to see some kind of legal battles and challenges in the coming weeks and months, which will lead to the formal expulsion of Bersatu from Perikatan Nasional. Yep. And I think the reality is that Bersatu candidates were not given the Watika, the letter of accreditation, to stand as candidates, and therefore they have decided to stand on their own under their own symbol. So Bersatu is a standalone party contesting there. And Perikatan Nasional, which now combines PAS and the former defectors from Bersatu under Parti Wawasan, are now in one side acting in concert with Barisan Nasional. Now they have coordinated in order to pool the votes. So I think the role of Bersatu there is about survival. It's about to ensure that the party brand and that the party base is still there. And I think when I speak to some people from Bersatu, one of the things they said that, look, we are basically on a downtrend as a party, but the members are still coming forward. And so they said that in this particular election, the reason why they fielded 24 candidates is because people wanted to become candidates under the party symbol.
But I don't think it's crazy to say that many voters are quite confused, especially
Yes.
since we're just coming out of Johor, where BN and PN were in competition with each other. Do you think these evolving political arrangements, changing alliances from one election to the other, represents a more short-term thing where we are in this transitionary stage? Or do you think it's going to be more long-term in its transformation of Malaysian coalition politics?
I can't say whether it's going to be long-term or short-term, but I think this is the current episode which is interesting because I think you have a situation where the leaders of both parties have sort of agreed that if they work together, they can probably capture parliament at some point, And I think in this case, Negeri Sembilan is a test bed. In Johor, we see limited contestation. There's some multi-corner contest, but there's also coordination as well, where in seats where Barisan Nasional fielded certain candidates and non-Malay candidates and PAS actually stood out of those elections. So I think we are in a transition process and we are going to see this experiment play out in the southern zone, potentially Melaka as well. But I think it will be much harder to see it play out in the national elections because there both parties are competing for the same sets of voters and seats.
Now, let's talk about what will shape voter decisions. We saw Johor unfold, sitting here in the studio and also watching what was happening. Now, in Merdeka Centre's observation, what's going to shape the issues? What will be most influential that will shape voter decisions today?
Well, I think, we cut to the chase, and I think the fundamental issue in this election is identity politics. And basically, parties on one side, basically Barisan Nasional and Perikatan Nasional, on the ground in the campaign hustings are basically talking about let's kick out DAP from the state government, let's kick them out in the federal government in the election, let's work together and address the rights of the Malays. So the campaign has taken on a very strong tone on identity politics. And I think when we look at the surveys that we have done over the last 3 weeks or so, it's playing out and people are lapping it up.
Thank you, Ben. Now, we have Jared Ratnam, who is with us right now, and I believe that he's actually on the way to Seremban. Where are you, Jared?
Hi guys. Currently at the newsroom here at Bernama, where we're still figuring out what's going to happen because we need to think about moving into later tonight and tomorrow. If we need to, we always need to be on standby. Having said that, later tonight we'll be having Taufik Issa and Wan Sharina on the airwaves after you guys to take on the baton and to take us through the results, which will be coming out later today. And I'm also very late at this point, simply because I need to be going home and casting my vote soon. But having listening to what Ben was saying from here, yes, there's a palpable tension, but the people from where I am, and let's be clear here, where I am, which is Seremban, that's where I was born and raised and still go back to, and the people just about a mile away from me have different ideals. We want, and we know this. And I just call home. My whole family has gone out. My 88-year-old mother is making her way to the voting station as we speak. But everyone's pretty quiet. Seremban town is very quiet today, although the numbers are up and people are going out to vote. At this point, what I'd like to tell all of Negeri Sembilan is please go out and cast your vote. I know friends who said, no, I don't want to do this. I don't feel like doing this. Please just go out there, take your IC and cast your vote right now. There's a palpable tension and a lot of us can't address it. It will be addressed in due time. There's an elephant in the room and that needs to be addressed after this, and that will be addressed by the people who need to address it. And I think everyone knows what we're talking about. But I guess at this point, what we want to know is what's going to be happening. Politics is changing, it will change, and it has to evolve. And I guess this evening we'll find out. We see a pattern from Johor. We see now Negeri Sembilan is going to be another litmus test as to what's going to be happening. And I'm sure Ben will be the best person to give us the insight on that. Nadia, Jason.
Terima kasih Gerard. Untuk maklumat kepada anda yang sedang menonton ketika ini, laporan semasa serta perkembangan terkini sepanjang hari pengundian ini dan keputusan pilihan raya yang dijangka ketahui malam ini boleh didapati dengan melayari portal khas pilihan raya Negeri Sembilan bernama seperti yang tertara di kaca TV di prn.bernama.com/negeri N9. Dan kita ada berita terkini iaitu kadar keluar mengundi pada jam 2 petang adalah 51.58% iaitu bersamaan dengan 443,461 orang sudah keluar mengundi pada jam ini. That is 51.58% of people have already gone out to vote as
That's
of
more
2
than the
p.m.
last
today.
round.
That is more than the last round for sure.
Baik, maka kita akan teruskan liputan ini dengan Undi Negeri Sembilan dengan membawakan anda lintas langsung dan perkembangan terkini di DUN N33 di Sri Tanjung bersama rakan setugas kami, Muzamil Abdullah yang kini berada di College Vocational Port Dickson. Muzamil, silakan.
State election has now reached its peak. All eyes are on the state's 867,151 ordinary voters who holds the mandate to determine the future direction of Negeri Sembilan and who will fill all the seats within the state's legislative assembly seats. Looking at the political landscape within this land of Adat Perpatih, one of the fiercest battlegrounds and one of the main focus among political analysts is where I am standing right now, which is the N33 Sri Tanjung State Constituency under the Port Dickson parliamentary seat. This morning, I am at the Port Dickson Vocational College, where voting had begun smoothly at 8 a.m. earlier today. A total of 7 polling stations have been opened, and many of the voters who came here earlier today were among the youngsters, young people eager to cast their ballots, while the weather remains favourable, as typically rain will be expected later this evening. And now, this mixed constituency is witnessing an extraordinary 5-cornered fight, the largest multi-cornered race within this state's election. The incumbent from Pakatan Harapan, Datuk Dr. G. Rajasekaran, is defending his seat against PN candidate A. Achutan. Perikatan Nasional has fielded its youngest candidate, M. Levanishwaran, while 2 independent candidates, Datuk A. Saravanan and Islah Wahyudi Zainuddin, have also entered the race, making it a highly competitive contest. Beyond the 5-way battle, however, the more important note to remember is the sentiment and the perception of the rakyat at the ground. Based on observations and campaign reports throughout the election period, voters in Sri Tanjung have voiced out a couple of concerns regarding the situation within Sri Tanjung. For local communities such as Kampung Paya and those living in coastal areas, the performance of elected representatives and improvements to local infrastructure remains the key benchmark. Residents are calling for lasting solutions to flash floods, upgrades to water retention systems, and a more consistent economic assistance for Port Dickson, seeing that it is a tourism destination centre. More importantly, as a truly multiracial constituency with a relatively balanced demographics of Chinese, Malay and Indian voters, many residents have expressed their desire for political stability while rejecting campaigns and also politics based on divisive 3R narratives. They want a representative with strong moral integrity, free from any negative image and perceptions, and above all, someone who remains close to the rakyat. Some voters have also voiced concerns of intense vote splitting, but many also see this as an opportunity to truly filter and elect their candidates based on performance and not simply based on party affiliation. Right, with 19,239 registered voters in Sri Tanjung, the biggest unanswered question remains whether the silenced voters, fence sitters and younger electorate will actually play a pivotal role during this campaign within this state election, or whether loyal voting patterns will preserve Pakatan Harapan's hold on this seat of N33 Sri Tanjung. Everything will ultimately be answered later tonight when SPR announced the final decision for the Negeri Sembilan 16 state election. To all Negeri Sembilan voters who are yet to cast their ballots, please do so before this evening, before the gates are closed, as your votes matter. I am Muzamil Abdullah and cameraman Faris. Back to you at Wisma Bernama, Kuala Lumpur.
Thank you, Muzamil, for those insights, reporting live from Port Dickson. Throughout the day, Bernama's journalists and crew are stationed in several strategic locations across Negeri Sembilan to monitor the voting process, the atmosphere at polling centres, as well as voter turnout.
Ayuh kepada mereka-mereka yang belum lagi mengundi seperti yang diberitahu oleh rakan tugas kami, Muzamil, pastikan anda ke polling station anda, tak kira sama ada di Jelebu atau Seremban atau Negeri Sembilan, pastikan anda keluar untuk mengundi kerana undi anda bermakna. Now, back to you, Ben. We were talking about cost of living, and Muzammil also highlighted some of the flashpoints. He mentioned some of the adat pepatih overlaps. We know that, for example, temuan communities in areas like Langkap, Kuala Pilah, for example, in Parit Gedong, Jelebu, and Bukit Kepong in Port Dickson, have also organised customary land use along adat pepatih lines regarding their traditional and territory and communal held maintained for future generations. But with that and everything else that Muzammil has said, things from tourism, and of course now we're also seeing a lot of congestion in the Seremban North-South Highway. So there are quite a few flashpoints and quite a lot of sore points. What are some of the issues on top of the cost of living that continues to be a major concern nationwide, but for the state of Negeri Sembilan, other than urban, semi-urban and rural constituencies, do voters actually prioritise different issues depending on where they live?
Well, I think, when people think about the issues that drive their choices for candidates, for the most part, people think at two different planes. I think when they speak about the issues that affect themselves, cost of living, stagnant wages, availability of jobs that match their qualifications, especially for young voters, those are priority issues. I think that's one element. For households who have kids and who are doing business and work in the communities, I think they're also concerned about infrastructure, facilities, congestion, and also the efficiency of local government services. And then beyond that, there's also, I would say, a large community of people, particularly those who are middle class and tax-paying people, who are very concerned about the broader pace of reforms in the country. They want to see more transparent government. They want to see more responsive elected representative, as what your colleague mentioned earlier. So all of that are issues that are very close to voters. But we also have to remember that when people make political choices, it is not all calculations. A lot of it is also driven by emotions and driven by sentiments that are being fired up. And some of these things, when we look at it, they may make choices that may ultimately undermine their own personal interests, So, and I think in this particular election, what's interesting is the choice people have between seeking answers for the everyday problems that they face in their daily life, as opposed to the broader narrative of identity politics. And then layered over this is the issue of the traditional governance structure, the adat pepatih, and also the current tussle we have in the Negeri Sembilan monarchy.
But even if, voters were to take a very calculative approach, the biggest challenge in state elections is that voters often evaluate issues beyond the direct responsibility of the state government, right? That there are areas or jurisdictions that are federal level, especially given Negeri Sembilan's proximity to the Klang Valley, where many voters commute back and forth between KL and Negeri Sembilan. Are voters distinguishing between state-level performance and federal-level issues when making their choices in your perception so far?
I mean, in the studies that we have done, yes, people do distinguish between state-level issues and problems and then national-level problems, and who they attribute the responsibility for addressing those issues. When people look at issues that affect the community, like flooding, like land applications that take decades to be resolved, or if they look at local government services, those things are state-level issues or local issues. But when people look at cost of living and people look at reforms, that's something national. And that's what they attribute to national leadership and national parties. Where things are bridging between national and local issues are things like cost of living issues, because people are affected by it on a daily basis, and they can see things that are happening in the media and all that. And I think the campaigns are going to drive this narrative that the cost of living problems that people face, stagnant wages, are the result of weak implementation of policies or ineffective policies that are being put across by government. So I think what they have to contend with is the debate. From one side saying that the government is not doing enough, another side saying, look, we are doing it, but it takes time to trickle down. So that's, I think, people have to make up their minds.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's a mixture of issues that are state-based as well as federal issues that can no longer be denied. And then, of course, there's currently the Madani government factor of what are the decisions that voters and the people of Negeri Sembilan are going to make. But if you're talking about, although this is a state election, I do believe that whatever that's happening at federal government under the Madani administration is an inevitable part of how people are also going to decide what to choose in the broader political conversation. And we see this, of course, playing out perhaps differently in Johor, but with a smaller voter base, this is still just as important. Now, to what extent do you think national sentiments is going to influence the things that we're going to see today?
Well, national factors are going to influence certain segments of voters, because we know that certain segments of voters are keen to see reforms being implemented because they voted candidates and parties that promise them governance and institutional reforms. You have that. The other part is groups of voters, particularly belonging to the minority communities, do expect to be given better treatment than what they perceive to have received in the past. I think those are two major issues that people speak about and people expect from government. And I think the election will show whether or not they are happy or unhappy with what things have been delivered to them. If we look back at the Johor state election, we see a big shift in terms of ethnic Indian voters. Like in the past, 75 or to 80% of Indian voters voted Pakatan Harapan. But in the recent Johor election, the number dropped to about 35%. So why is that? What were the demands of the Indian community that seemingly was unmet and caused them to shift? So you have national issues that will affect state election results, because whether you like it or not, it's an election. That's one opportunity people have to send a very strong signal to the powers that be, and they will take it up. I think we in Malaysia are blessed with people who are very patient, people who work through the rules and cast their decisions at the ballot box as opposed to at the
Taking
streets.
it to the streets. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as election results roll in tonight, every electorate is different. Ben, can you paint a picture about the Negeri Sembilan voting base? Is it a pragmatic voting base? Do they look beyond traditional party loyalties? Do they focus on delivery, credibility, and candidate quality? Is there something qualitatively distinct about what we're looking at tonight?
Well, I think different parts of the community look at things differently. If you look at the broader Malay community, identity and protection of their community interests and rights, I think matter most. That probably is going to influence 70-80% of the voting decision. And so the decision by PAS and UMNO to work together certainly will lead to a pooling of those results. What is interesting for analysts like me looking at the results is vote transferability. How likely will a Barisan Nasional supporter vote for a PAS or Wawasan candidate as opposed to PAS voter supporting a Barisan Nasional candidate? We were looking at that. For the minority communities, I think they are looking at whether or not they will have candidates that will continue to champion their interests, and also whether or not they will continue to have adequate representation in the state government in the future.
Man, without predicting the outcome, we don't have a magic 8 crystal ball here, but without predicting the outcome, what would you think are the key indicators that analysts like yourself will be watching closely for the rest of today and begin the coming of tonight?
Well, I mentioned, I think the first thing is the effectiveness of vote transferability between the supporters of the different parties. Because I think we have now an interesting contest where Barisan and PAS is working together. You have Bersatu as a dark horse, as some people might say a spoiler, and then you have Pakatan Harapan that's contesting all the seats.
We've also got Asli that's fielding its first Orang Asli candidate in Negeri Sembilan first time this time.
I think that would be very interesting to watch and to see how many of the Asli vote that they can attract. Because typically they will just go one way. But anyway, we'll see how it flows. I think we're looking at vote transferability between the different parties, particularly between PAS and Barisan voters. We want to look at voter turnout, especially young people, working age adults that are working elsewhere, making the trek back to Negeri Sembilan to vote. And they will, I think, less predictable than in the past, because we know that in the past people say, when people come back from Singapore to vote, they're going to vote for Pakatan Harapan. But not necessarily the case. And also, we also have a lot of other people who are in Klang Valley going back to Negeri Sembilan to vote, and they might vote the other candidates. And then I think the other part is actually swing movements in the marginal seats. We have quite a number of marginal seats, because typically when we look at seats, we look at voter composition of the ethnicity of the area, and typically if it falls above or below certain numbers, you know that this party A is more likely to win, party B likely to lose. But in this particular contest, number one, the threshold has come down from 70 to 60%, and yet there's still maybe about 5, 6 very marginal
Back to the point of what you said on fragmentation.
Yeah. Now, before we continue our conversation, we do have a short video message to share from leadership coach Farida Hamid for Negeri Sembilan voters today. Let's take a look.
In Negeri Sembilan, this is my advice to you. Particularly, this goes out to the younger voters. You may think your vote doesn't matter, but it does. And please vote for somebody that speaks to you in a language that you can see a brighter future, not just for Negeri Sembilan, but for Malaysia. Because Negeri Sembilan is so close to the national capital, and your future is at stake. The jobs that you want, the salaries that you want. Listen to how the politicians talk. Vote for those who speak the language that you want to hear, the language of hope, not the language of fear.
So much, Farida. Now, just a few updates before we continue. Traffic flow on several major routes around Seremban, as well as connecting roads to outlying districts such as Bukit Putus, Kuala Pilah, and Kuala Kelawang in Jelebu have been reported to be steadily building since earlier this morning. This surge is attributed to outstation voters returning to their hometowns to cast their ballots.
Baik, jadi untuk rakan-rakan dari Negeri Sembilan daripada Bukit Putus, Kuala Pilah dan Kuala Kelawang di Jelebu, pastikan anda pandu dengan selamat dan sampai ke polling station yang sepatutnya. So while polling centres across Negeri Sembilan have been focused on democracy in action, there's also been moments that are highlighted with the spirit of patriotism and civic participation. At the polling centre in Rantau, two sisters had turned up after arriving in coordinated outfits inspired by the Jalur Gemilang. There you have the ladies. They said that they wanted to celebrate their civic duty while embracing the spirit of National Day, which is happening just weeks away. And of course, we are in August today. Now, it's a colourful reminder that Election Day is not just about casting your ballots, it's also about celebrating civic pride and national unity. I wonder whether we're going to see more costumes by the end of the day, Jason.
Maybe that's going to be a new trend, dressing up to go and vote. Ben, I want to turn it back to you, just responding to what we just saw. Now, I think if we're online, it can get quite depressive in Malaysian news sometimes. But do you think moments like these reflect a growing sense of civic pride among Malaysians, especially around election time? And do you think pictures like those suggest Malaysians are becoming more invested in the democratic processes?
Oh yeah, certainly. I think people here welcome elections, and we have very high turnout rates. And I think what's, I would say, very encouraging when we look at data on elections in Malaysia is that the turnout rates for young people is sometimes higher than turnout rates for older people. So people do take the trouble to cast their ballots and find out about elections. So we do have, I would say, an electorate that's very interested. And I think for people as well, and I noticed this in Negeri Sembilan, is that people are, that the mode of campaigning is also changing.
Yes.
That we no longer have those big, huge ceramahs that we used to see years ago, but people are now is more grounded. It's smaller conversations that people have with their candidates, with party leaders, and I think it allows a more intimate discussion about the issues that people have, and it also grounds the leaders as well, in terms of whether they have or haven't met voters' expectations.
And I think there's also been sort of like a move in the kind of mediums that they've been choosing for, whether it's campaigning. So we've seen a lot more things like podcasts and, short form videos. And then a lot of our candidates have also gone on to TikTok to go and talk about their manifestos in more creative fashions. And I do believe that this is sort of like a means to attract different group of voters, and we're seeing in different countries these are also being done. But I do agree with you that the brick and mortar conversations that are intimate on ground is still very much needed for communities that may not be as wired as everybody else. Now, I do believe we've got AIRA AZHARI on the line. But before we go that,
I think just on to you, Ben. I think as we were continuing the conversation, I think around unity and civic duty, I think one of the more interesting bits about Negeri Sembilan, it's quite a mixed interesting seat, right?
It is.
Like a state. There are urban seats, you have Malay majority areas, mixed constituencies and rural seats. Ben, which are the most exciting seats that you'll be looking at tonight?
The semi-rural seats, because what we noticed that in semi-rural seats where you have, say, 60% Malay voters, 60 to 70% Malay voters and 30% voters from other communities, those are seats that are marginal, those are seats that are very competitive, and those are seats that will force the candidates to moderate themselves, that they have to speak to everyone in order to garner the votes. And so I think that's important way to temper the typical response to go into identity politics, that people still have to get votes from across the board rather than just cater or pander to one community.
Yeah, and definitely when you're talking about the multi-cornet contest that we're seeing, right, which is a feature now that we're seeing in Malaysian elections, we know that for Negeri Sembilan, there will be 2 seats that are 5 cornet fights, 2 seats are going to be 4 cornet fights, 21 seats are going to be 3 cornet fights, and there's going to be 11 seats that are going to be straight 2 cornet fights. That alone, to your earlier point, shows the fragmentation, shows the diversity, shows... I'm wondering what are the different manifestos that are going to be coming out, what are the different issues that are coming out, because it would probably be same issues, different person saying it, right? But in this multi-cornet contest, which will remain a feature of Malaysian elections, historically, who tends to benefit from such a contest, and what could be the factor that will influence today's outcome in particular?
Well, in the past, when there's multi-cornet contest in the Malay field, whether there's 3 big Malay parties contesting it or 2 big Malay parties such as PAS and Barisan Nasional contesting, then the party that benefits is Pakatan Harapan, because Pakatan Harapan captures a smaller share of the Malay votes. So, but when these 2 parties decide to work together, then I think that vote split is a fragmentation. Advantage is denied from Pakatan Harapan. But I think in this particular election, we see some semblance of vote splitting still taking place. So we see Bersatu contesting in over 20 seats. And in those places, they potentially can aid one of the 2 sides to win by taking away votes, or steal votes when they put in a Malay candidate in a non-Malay seat, something like that. We can see that play out. And I think this is going to be the pattern moving forward. So in the past, when there's competing parties in the Malay field, then you will have it benefits Pakatan Harapan. But when the opposition is split, then it also benefits Barisan Nasional.
Right. I guess when we look at the results tonight, perhaps we might see a significant shift compared with the 2023 state elections. But at the same time, it's a bit difficult to interpret, especially given the different alliances and compositions that we just saw being contested. But what can we tell tonight about, when we look at the results, about changing voter sentiment, especially if we do observe a shift?
Well, I think tonight we are going to see the pooling of voters from one side over the other. I think most parties continue to be able to draw support from their traditional constituencies. I think what has shifted here is that Barisan Nasional and Perikatan Nasional coordinating will be able to capture a bigger share of the Malay votes, and that I think puts them at a strong advantage in many of the seats that they're contesting. I think the big question mark to see is whether or not Pakatan Harapan is able to still maintain its base in support, because they've been state government since 2018 and there have not been any major crises or controversies with respect to the state administration in all of these years. But the question is, have they done enough in order to assuage, to persuade voters that they present a better lineup? And so I think, have to see that, whether voters really vote for performance or voters vote on hope or fear.
Now, earlier we saw on screen the different candidates. Just to share, the largest electorates right now is N25 Paroy that has over 64,000 registered voters, N21 Bukit Kepayang that has over 49,000 voters, N10, which is Nilai, which we saw earlier, has 47,000 plus voters, N27 Rantau, N13 Sikamat, which was of course formerly held by MB Aminuddin Harun. Now, while we're talking about all this, regardless who wins, right? What do you think are some of the lessons political parties should take from this election as they prepare for the next GE?
Well, I think a number of things. Number one, that you really have to be prepared much early, your candidates, and also getting your message across the ground. Because I think we are so used to having political parties always getting caught by surprise with elections, whereas we know that elections are going to roll by pretty soon. And so I think what will probably happen now is that we are going to be in nearly full campaign mode until whenever general elections are going to be called. And number two, social media is, I would say, social media is already there and everybody uses it. So parties need to find something that differentiates them, that changes the game in order to get the message across. And the 2-week campaign, I've always said it's very short. But what it really means is basically to get your voters out. So they must have done their work well in advance before that. And I think the results of this election is going to point to certain parties to actually figure a new strategy in order to keep their seats or maintain their base or carve out new bases of support in the future.
Ben, I mean, you were observing the 2-week campaigning period. Were there any surprises that you encountered, compared to normal campaigns in other states, especially given we've just come out of Johor, and were there any differences or things that surprised you?
No major surprises, because I think, like for us, we did a survey like 3 months ago, then 3 weeks ago. We kind of know what's going to happen tonight. But what I want to say is that where I think things are interesting is the mode of campaigning has changed, where in the past people relied on very big events. Now the events are much smaller. And also how the roles have flipped. Parties that used to be in opposition used to have more guerrilla-style campaigning, on the back of a Toyota Hilux.
You're right, actually.
But now, the parties that used to be opposition, they are now in government. Now they host big 100-table, 300-table dinners, and expect a change in the way they're going to garner results. So it's interesting to see how things evolve, that they have become the creatures that they criticized in the past. But also, voters have been a bit more hesitant in trying to express themselves. So very hard to read the ground, some places.
You've actually brought up some really interesting points, and I think noted and really valid. Now, we do have AIRA AZHARI, CEO of Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, on the phone. Are you there, AIRA?
Hello.
Right. AIRA, as a continuation to what Ben rightly pointed out, and I thought that was a really poignant information to kind of digest on, regardless of which coalition forms the next government, and we're going to see this very soon, what should be the immediate government priorities for Negeri Sembilan to address the voter expectations? We spoke about voter expectations earlier, but in your view, what would that be, and how do we need to address this?
Firstly, I think the most important thing is for whoever the state government is, which party wins, to make sure to give constituency allocations, equal constituency allocations to the opposition as well. Because we've seen this to be a big problem in many states and at the federal level, of course, where allocations are only given to allies in government, and opposition parties don't get the same amount or even any amount at all. So this has caused unequal, it's unequal treatment, but also it's sort of a form of voter punishment as well, right? Which is unfair, and the practice really needs to stop. And this is something that IDEAS has also spoken about in a lot of our work. So CDF allocations are really important. So I would really like to see that as a priority governance-wise by whichever party that gets into power. Yeah.
AIRA, we've seen many promises being made across this election campaign. Looking forward from a governance perspective, how do you think voters can measure whether these promises being made now are being delivered effectively over the next 5 years?
So at the state level, it's actually not as visible as at the federal level, in the sense that the state assemblies do not sit for a very long time or for that many days, not as many as the federal parliament. So I think for voters, the most obvious indicator would be what's happening at their own constituency. So this is why voters will usually judge their state assembly persons, their ADUNs, from whatever is happening in their own neighborhood, at their homes, on whether potholes have been fixed and drains have been fixed and stuff like that. So, that's really just the most obvious way in which voters will get to judge. Also, each of the coalitions did offer manifestos. So that's always an important benchmark for voters. And I would like to see how much of those manifestos do get, how many of those promises are going to be fulfilled. But it's not so easy at the state level, I think, because a lot of things actually happen at a day-to-day constituency level, and not like at a higher governance level, I would say. Yeah.
Ira, we had you in the studio during the Johor elections, and we're still seeing this now in Negeri Sembilan election as well. Ben highlighted that there are many issues that are affecting people's daily lives, and Muzammil, our colleague on ground, also shared some of the sentiments of the voters, be it whether or not they are young voters, first-time voters, or seasoned voters. But I want to ask you, in terms of some of these issues that are facing daily Negeri Sembilan citizens or residents, we know that that relationship between state and federal is an extremely crucial one, irrespective of how people vote, right? And that relationship between the state and federal government. So how important do you see a constructive federal-state relationship will be moving forward, especially in ensuring that the delivery of the development and the promises that were made prior and the promises that are made for voters to come is not just going to see more voter punishment?
Yeah, that's a great question, because previously the incumbent government, incumbent MB, of course from PH is the same as the Prime Minister's party at the federal level. But if we do see a change in state government after today to BNPN coalition, then I think that's the test for federal-state relations in Negeri Sembilan. So we have seen examples from other states where when the party ruling the state and also the federal government is different, the dynamics are very different. And also, of course, the obvious case is Terengganu, where the Menteri Besar himself has expressed disappointment that the royalty payments, or the Wang Ehsan rather, has not been paid as per usual. So I think it'll be interesting to see the dynamic if the ruling party changes, and that's really my concern, because this is why we say that federal-state relations needs to be governed by rules. It needs to be rules-based and have principles of good governance, rather than be subject to partisanship, as we have seen in the past. Because you are right, federal-state relations is extremely important in ensuring that development priorities are delivered in all the states, really. So that's something that we should keep an eye on, really, after today, if the state government changes hands. Yeah.
Ira, you, I think, hit the nail on its head, especially when you're talking about governance, right? So beyond economic growth, beyond of the daily bread and butter issues that we're seeing right now, what governance indicators should Malaysians really look out for and really demand from the government, both state and federal, to determine whether the next Negeri Sembilan government will be a successful one?
Well, okay. So on governance indicators, I would actually want to see substantive changes in state assemblies reform. So I mentioned earlier about the low number of days in which the state assembly sit in the first place. So that's a problem, but not just in Negeri Sembilan. In all states, do state assemblies actually have proper committee systems like they do in the federal parliament? I don't think so. I think Selangor does better than some other states, but in Negeri Sembilan, the committee system is also not very strong, which means that the state government, the executive, the EXCO members cannot be held accountable as much as they should be. And I guess in terms of constituency allocations, we did speak about them, but the other side of constituency allocations, which is accountability by the ADUNs themselves on how that money is being spent. So constituency expenditures, I would say, is something that should be published, actually, and all ADUNs should be accountable on how that money is spent. So that's another way in which, as voters, we can also keep them accountable. So you have you have received this allocation from the state. So how is that money being put to use for the betterment of the people of Negeri Sembilan? So these are just some of the things, and I would say that I think this whole thing about how, as voters, we should be looking at policies and what the parties have to offer instead of the racial and religious rhetoric that we've seen. That's really important, but I wouldn't put that just on the people, right? I think the politicians who come into power also need to show that they are also serious about reforms and governance and policies. So I would prioritize those areas of governance for the next state government.
Baik, terima kasih AIRA bersama kita untuk sekali lagi. Sekarang untuk laporan langsung dari DUN N14 Ampangan, kita akan bersama rakan setugas Nur Elisa Amirah Suhaimi yang kini berada di Sekolah Menengah Agama Datuk Kelana Petra Ma'amur, Jalan Kuala Pilah, Ampangan. Silakan Elisa.
Baik, terima kasih Jason dan Nadia. Saya kini berada di Sekolah Menengah Agama Datuk Kelana Petra Makmur, Jalan Seremban, Kuala Pilah, Negeri Sembilan, bagi meninjau keadaan tempat mengundi bagi DUN Ampangan dengan 21,336 jumlah pengundi pelbagai peringkat. Dan sekitar jam 11.20 pagi tadi telah pun diadakan sidang media SPR di sini yang memaklumkan jangkaan 72 hingga 75% bagi pengundi dapat dicapai. SPR juga telah menjalankan satu projek rintis sistem OCR-VA untuk merekodkan kehadiran pengundi secara digital dan digunakan di sekolah ini sebanyak 7 saluran. Berdasarkan pemerhatian saya juga sebentar tadi, pengundinya kebanyakan warga emas. Jadi buat anda yang belum turun mengundi, sila lakukan dengan segera kerana cuaca setakat ini masih baik, tapi dimaklumkan juga keadaan tidak menentu terutamanya di waktu petang. Jadi saya kira itu saja laporan langsung dari saya. Sekali lagi kepada anda yang masih belum menunaikan tanggungjawab anda untuk mengundi, sila lakukan dengan segera untuk mendapatkan hak anda sebagai rakyat Negeri Sembilan. Dan jangan lupa bawa my card dan semak saluran pengundian anda. Itu saja, kembali ke Wisma Bernama. Silakan.
Terima kasih Elisa. Betul tu Jason, kita kena bawa my card ataupun kad-kad yang penting dan
jangan
juga
bagi kepada sesiapa.
Betul, dan pastikan saluran yang betul. Tapi tahun ni kita tak ada pula dengar pasal pengundi yang sebelum ni telah meninggal dunia terus tiba hidup semula dan sebagainya kan. So I think it's a good sign. So terima kasih Elisa untuk mengikuti laporan semasa dan perkembangan terkini sepanjang hari pengundian pada hari ini. Sila bersama kami tonton dan layari khas portal kami Pilihan Raya Negeri Sembilan Bernama di prn.bernama.com/Negeri Sembilan N9 dash ataupun slash. Anda juga boleh mengetahui keputusan pilihan raya pada malam ini menerusi portal kami. Jason, rupanya nombor keseluruhan masih sama ya. Informasi yang dapat terkini adalah 51.58% pengundi yang telah keluar untuk mengundi, lebih kurang 443,461.
Right now we want to continue our conversation with our guest in house, Ibrahim Suffian or Ben from Merdeka Center. Now, I think, are looking at Negeri Sembilan as a sort of stepping stone or chess piece in the larger scheme of politics in Malaysia. And many Malaysians, I think, are quite anxious about what's going to happen after Negeri Sembilan. Depending on what happens tonight, what do you think the significance of Negeri Sembilan election polls will be?
I think this Negeri Sembilan has very broad implications for our national politics and also the pathway towards GE16. We don't know when GE16 will be, but we do know that between now and then, there will still be 2 elections in place. We are going to have Melaka, which has to have their elections on Boxing Day and at the end of the year, and also Sarawak also will have their elections as well. So I think what we are seeing here is a blueprint for potential GE16 strategies for the parties. I think we're going to see the effectiveness of cross-coalition seat negotiations, that have now taken place in Negeri Sembilan may also be in place for other states as well. Potentially Selangor, because we know that some of the political leaders of these contesting parties have already started talking about it, and this can be a kind of template of what kind of political arrangements, coalition arrangements that we will see in the future. Number 2 is also the internal, I would say, re-evaluation of major political parties, where in the past they contested very strongly on very specific ideologies. Now there is a kind of blurring of the party philosophies and ideologies, and there seems to be a commonality that's emerging within some parties. And some parties, let's say, are going to be struggling to find what is it that they can do to compel people to continue supporting them. And I would say, finally, it's institutionalization of PACs between state government coalition parties, federal government coalition parties, that I think we will evolve to a situation where we see parties that are opposition in the state may be in the same government at the federal level, and so you're going to have that. And what it means for politics is that probably it will be calmer, more cordial, ideally more civil politics where you don't punish one another like what we've seen in the past, because you are also partners at the central government.
In your view, Ben, I think we've seen Malaysians also, I mean, I'm sorry for saying this, I think sometimes we Malaysians can also be fickle. We might have at one stand a government that we say, okay, we are voting based on hope. And then maybe we don't get necessarily what we want, and then we'll go, okay, we're going to now vote based on what we know is going to work. And then later we're going to decide to say, no, we're going to vote based on identity. And then we might turn around and again to say, no, we need structure, the direction. So in your view, the future of coalition politics in Malaysia, how is this going to pan out? You did say that people are going to be more cordial, people are going to be more aligned, working together. In what way? Can you explain that a little more?
Well, I mean, we have a situation where, say, in Johor, where we have Barisan Nasional, basically sweeping a lot of seats, and Pakatan Harapan is the opposition there. But at the national level, at federal level, Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Harapan are coalition partners in government. And what it means is that while they are competing at state level, they continue to have to cooperate at the federal level. And it means that it limits the degree of the divisiveness and also the level of hostility that you put in place in order to win over the competition. So it brings civility into the political contest, and I think that's a good sign that ultimately, all of these parties, political organizations and individual leaders are trying to offer a better solution to the rakyat of Malaysia. And so they may have different approaches, different words that they use, but ultimately they have to come back to the middle and moderate themselves and be able to work and deliver.
I mean, Ben, you're describing politics that's evolving and adapting at a rapid pace, and you've been polling for decades now. Are you observing that the electorate, the Malaysian voters, are we maturing at a pace that is fast enough to really understand and comprehend and become informed voters to keep up with the level of politics we're in?
Well, I think that's still a challenge. The reason is that we now have too much information. Where in the past, maybe 20, 30 years ago, people were starved of what's really going on. Now there's too much information, and there's also a lot of disinformation and fake news out there. I think this is, I would say, a real challenge this day, to sift through what's real, what's not, what's fake, and what's genuine. I think that's the challenge. And the other thing is also the flow of information is huge. You basically get so much information every day from all of these competing parties that one sort of wonders how much of it sticks in the minds of the voters at the end of the day. And therefore, I think while we are now in this age where everybody is on some social media platforms, I think human touch, human explanation, the human voice still matters very much. That the parties that invest in taking time to listen to people, I think is the one that can carry the vote.
Ben, thank you so much for spending your Saturday with us. I think we're all going to be tuning in again to our phones looking at the results tonight. Now that brings us to the end of this afternoon's edition of Siaran Khas Undi Negeri Sembilan. Stay with Bernama TV as we continue to bring you the latest developments, live reports, and comprehensive coverage of Negeri Sembilan state elections throughout the day. You can also follow the latest developments, election results, and updates via Bernama's dedicated Negeri Sembilan State Election Portal at prn.bernama.com/n9.
Baik, malam ini jangan lepaskan peluang untuk menyaksikan siaran khas keputusan Undi Negeri Sembilan yang membawa perkembangan terkini secara langsung, laporan dan juga pusat-pusat perjumlahan undi serta kupasan pakar menjelang pengumuman keputusan rasmi pada malam ini. Siapakah yang akan menerima mandat rakyat menentukan hala tuju Negeri Sembilan? Saksikan liputan eksklusif yang bermula pada pukul 8.30 malam ini hanya di Bernama TV. Saya NADIAH.
And I'm Jason Wee.
Thanks for watching.